everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and in today's episode of Dyepot PS, we are going to overdye some self-striping yarn. This is probably the easiest way to make a self-striping yarn. If you start off with something that already has stripes and then you overdye it, you've got stripes there. But there's a few different things that we could do to not necessarily enhance, but to add some, I guess, more differences or variation to the self-striping pattern. And so yeah, we're gonna have some fun. The colorway we're gonna overdye today is Knit Picks Felici in the color Ice Cream Truck. This pretty yarn is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, and each ball is 50 grams. There's not a date or anything that I can see on the label, but I definitely picked this up a few years ago with the intent to overdye it. When you want to pick a yarn for overdyeing, you want medium to pastel colors. If the colors are already really saturated, you're not going to be able to cover it up with much. But in this beautiful, I guess, white, blue, and pink colorway, there's a lot that we could do to change the nature of the yarn. So what's the plan? What could we do? Oh, there are too many possibilities, which is the reason why this video has not yet happened. We could take this yarn and speckle on it, and then you'd have self-striping yarn with speckles. You could take it, put it into a circular skein, and then dip dye it. And that I think we might do, because it'll add some sort of like repeating kind of colorway inside the striping, which I think will feel really fun. You could do resist, where you overdye this, you add like resist in different spots, and then the self-striping that you see would be in the reverse sort of speckles. So, I don't know, but the first thing we have to do is transfer this into some skeins. I debated how I wanted to play with this. Should I do two different techniques? Should I do just one technique? And I realized I have an opportunity to create something really unique here. So I created 4 different sized skeins using my Crazy Monkey automated skein winder. The longest one, I believe, is about 2 yards. The shortest one, maybe about 1 yard or even a little less. And then there's 2 intermediate ones. And I thought that we could dip dye this all at the same time. So what's going to happen is that on the longest skein, we're going to have the most saturated color. And then we'll have a little bit more of the saturated color, but it's going to get lighter starting on the second. And then the smallest one probably won't have any of the most saturated color, depending on how fast we go in. But what this is going to do is give us 4 skeins with varying amounts of color and repeats, which I think is a very unique fade set. Rebecca, are we going to get a swatch at the end of this video? Probably. This is my intent, even though I don't think I will go through all the different striped colors for each of the 4 skeins, but I will at least do a tiny swatch to give a sense of how the different colors are knitting up, since we are doing essentially 4 different colorways, even though they are related and they go together in one set. Swatches can look extremely different depending on your gauge, so how small or large your stitches are, whether you're knitting or crocheting, if you're knitting flat, so going back and forth, or in the round, and then the number of stitches you're using. You could get micro stripes on one type of pattern or pooling on another one. So there's a lot of variables in there that you do need to consider when you are looking at a swatch and thinking about how this yarn might work for a given project. This is all a very long-winded way to say that I enjoy being able to provide a swatch in a video, especially when I think that it answers something about the technique. But I do not have the capacity to include one in every video at this time. Maybe someday, if I expand my team, that's something that I could incorporate into the production. But for now, you know, when I think that the video truly needs it, like I'm realizing that this one does, then I will do my best to include it. In our dye pot, I've got 16 cups of water, and I'm gonna add 3 tablespoons of white vinegar. And now I'm going to add 1 cup, or about 236 milliliters of Dharma Electric Violet. This is a 1% stock solution that I mixed a while ago, and I think will be a really, really pretty color over this self-striping yarn. I am really excited to see the results of this technique. I will admit I sort of regret doing this with the self-striping yarn instead of maybe a bare yarn first, but let's go big or go home. I think it's going to be a really unique way to over dye this yarn, and it's definitely outside the box. I pre-soaked the yarn overnight and made all these zip ties about the same size and connected all 4 of them with one that I will hold for the dip dyeing, which will help prevent the yarn from slipping on me. While our dye bath is heating up, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of the ChemKnits patrons for supporting this series and the content on the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. I would like to give a special shout out to Karen Siegel and the rest of the Fiber patrons. You'll see some of their names crossing the screen right now. If you'd like to learn more about the Patreon and the perks you can get, such as early access to the Dyepot PS series, behind the scenes sneak peeks, advance notice of shop restocks, permanent shop coupons, and more, you can find all of the details in the Patreon link in the video description and iCard. Thank you so much, patrons. Squeezing out this yarn felt so weird because it gets smaller and smaller towards the bottom. Oh my gosh. And we're just gonna start dipping down and up. And dipping down and up. And dipping. I'm trying to decide, like, I guess I'm gonna go all the way until our shortest one gets, oh, I need to be careful. Get some of the pigment. I should, like, try to move it through. Where are my tongs? Here are my tongs. Oh my goodness. I didn't think about like how practically this was gonna work, but I'm gonna stir it in as I dip a bit with the tongs to help get color coverage. And then I'm gonna go more and more. Oof. The color is really, really pretty. It's a little unwieldy. There we go, with all those zip ties. You can see already it's getting lighter, and I don't think I can even lift that darkest end up off completely. But yeah, it's definitely already getting significantly lighter. But even if I had just over dyed it, look how pretty that is. That is really pretty. I could have gone for something with more contrast, like a navy or something like that, but I wanted to do something that would sort of fit with the colors if we had some of the originals exposed at the end. Going a little further. I think that this is really, really cool, and I'm really, really curious what this will look like. I'm going in and adding, just because I don't want there to be like a big like demarcation line or something. I'm not going to put the whole thing in yet. I am switching hands, but you can see our dye bath is clearing. I guess I've been dipping maybe about 2 minutes. But I think this is cool. So with the amount of dye that I added, that would give us about a 1% depth of shade across all of the yarn. But we didn't start with white yarn, for one, and for two, since we're dip dyeing, we're getting more color at one end and then less here at this other end. And yeah, you can see in the middle, oh my gosh, This is so cool. There's definitely some color in there. If I had added more vinegar, the colors would have started striking faster, but I wanted to have some control over it. But you can see there is a big difference between, can you see? Oh, it's a little blown out, but there's a big difference between the darkest and the lightest, which is what we wanted. Okay, I'm gonna set that down for just a minute. The tips are still out, and I'm gonna add another 1, 2, 3 tablespoons of white vinegar. And we're gonna stir this up as we dip in and out. One concern with dip dyeing is that when you put it in, put it all in a little too soon, is that then you won't see as much contrast. But so that's one of the reasons why I added some acid now. And yeah, it's clearing nicely, but I do want to make sure that we can maintain some difference in here, because I think that that will look really, really cool when we go and try to swatch it. I could honestly remove it and set it aside, but I don't really want to. Alright, I think at this point I'm going to add the rest in. Even if the changes end up being a little subtle, I will be okay. But I do see some significant differences between both ends. So now I'm going to, actually, after a lot of roundabout thinking, I decided to zip tie it to the end to keep these ends just out of the water. That way, even if things even out color-wise, we will still have an area that is still more pastel. I don't expect it to be a problem, but I'm hedging my bets because I'm going to be knitting 4 swatches. Alright, I'm going to let things sit here on low heat for 10 minutes and we'll come back and check in. But just to show sort of where we are color-wise, a lot of the color has definitely cleared. It has been 10 minutes and let's see how we're doing. There is still some color in there and it's hard for me to see, but there is like a difference between the darkest and even that midsection. It's subtle but cool. I'm glad I did leave the tip out though, because that will give us an area of high contrast. I'm going to add, well, this vinegar jug is nearly tapped out, so I'm going to add a good old splash of vinegar. I'm going to go ahead and quickly dip this other end in, mix that up, and I think what I want to do, honestly, is I'm going to turn off the heat and let this cool completely in the pot and let that color absorb. If the color has not absorbed by the time the pot is completely cool, then we can always turn on the heat and heat it up some more to set it. But sometimes just a little bit of time and patience is all that's needed to get the rest of the color to absorb. Okay, I don't think we're 100% cool, but we're definitely cooler. And oh yeah, we're actually maybe lukewarm, but fairly cool. Let's go and wash all of this yarn. The darkest section almost feels like there's only 2 colors now versus the at least 4 that there were originally. I still have all the skeins connected just because it feels like that makes sense. Maybe I should have done something harsher and just left the lightest part out, but I'm not seeing any bleeding, which is awesome. I'm now going to add some clear dish soap. I'm not really expecting to see bleeding from the Electric Violet, but this is also a commercial colorway, and commercial colorways can bleed as well. So it's not just like an issue with indie dyed yarns. There might be a hint of something that came out with the soap, but I'm not super concerned. I think these are gonna look really, really cool knit up. I'm trying to figure out exactly how I want to do the swatches so that way we can see them well. I sort of want to do them all connected. We'll see. We will see. I just know that I will probably eventually sell these as a set. I don't see any more bleeding. I'm going to wash the soap out of the yarn, put it all through the spin dryer, and hang it up to dry. Da 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 da! Here is our beautiful colorway that we created. But I think I want to sort of line this up a different way. The palest segments are a very similar size on all of them. But you can, when I put it out this way, you can really get a sense of how the dark sections look very, very different on each of the skeins. I think the biggest one will give us a sort of micro striped feel. I mean, they're all going to have some striping in them, but in the darkest section is going to be the longest, and so it might last a couple of rows, whereas the lightest section probably won't. And then as we go on, in the smaller two, the darkest section is a much more midpoint. I'm not sure how much it shows up on camera, but there's a lot more of sort of these medium tones that, you know, don't exist on the darker ones. So, gosh, I am so intrigued. And again, I'm kicking myself a little bit that I'm doing this experiment on some yarn that is self-striping also because of the other layer that adds to all of this. But now we really just have to go make some swatches. Here I have 4 different swatches for our skeins where we started with the longest and went down to the shortest. They are different sizes because I was trying to go for a couple different striped colors, which on the second longest you could see really, really nicely here. But then when I went and knit the shortest, there were a few different pinks in there, so you can kind of sort of see how this palest pink is a little darker and a little darker. So we do have multiple stripes in this section, but I went all the way until it started to shift to blue. So that way you can see that there is sort of sometimes a striping line. It isn't all just sort of one color. Now what's really cool in the shortest one is the pooling. At first it was looking almost like a gradient with all the most saturated stuff lining up on one side, then the other. Oh right, these swatches are knit on 3.25 millimeter, which is US size 3 knitting needles, and I did 30 stitches back and forth in stockinette. But with this number of stitches, we got some pooling and then some micro striping of the light and dark patches. But the light patches are the most frequent. As we get a little longer, this swatch is sort of bitty, we still get something that's sort of micro stripy, but there is going to be more of the dark color, and so there's going to be less space between the lighter patches. I think in all of them, the light patches are about the same size. The difference is how frequently do they occur. I really like the patterning of this skein right here. It's probably my favorite with this swatch size. But it is really, really, really important to keep in mind that when you're swatching, a swatch can look very, very different. If we were to knit a pair of socks with these needles with, say, 60 stitches, this might look a lot more like this with more micro stripes because you're not going back and forth and there's just more distance between the colors. Finally, our longest skein, you can see that we've got this really cool sort of striping thing here. You can feel those micro stripes where we've got those more pastel patches, but way more spread out than even what we saw on the previous one. I think the finished yarn is really cool, and it's a fun way to combine a dip dyeing technique with a self-striping yarn. I think it would be interesting, again, to try this technique with a bare yarn or at least a more solid yarn at the beginning, because then I think you could get a sense of the pooling and microstriping pattern a little better. But if I just pop over to black and white, you can kind of get a little bit of a sense. Sure, the more pastel purpley white looks brighter and more white than some of the pinks that we have down here. But looking at this more in terms of the different saturation of tones, you can get a little better picture of how this might conceivably look on a solid base versus that striping base. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching this video. This is definitely the most swatching I have ever done for an episode of Dyepot Weekly or Dyepot PS, and I hope that you appreciate the extra effort that goes into that. And I think in this case, where we were varying this length of our skeins, it was helpful to see how they sort of striped up once we were knitting with it. Again, I want to caution that things will look different depending on your stitch number. And so that's something to keep in mind, and something that maybe you can go back and design into your yarn based on what you want to knit with it in the end. So that is something to think about. Once again, I would like to thank all of the ChemKnits patrons for your support. Your contributions really do help me go bigger on some of these videos and use more yarn or more materials, and I just really, really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. If you would like to learn more about the ChemKnits Patreon, you can find a link both in the video description and iCard. And I was like on the fence about reskeining, but I think what I'm going to do for now is not reskein the yarn, but give an option for when I add it in the shop to reskein it for the person. But this way I can keep the skeins as 4 different sizes, so there's like a real visual cue as to which one is which, and if you wanted to try to fade them together in some kind of way, where to start. I think it would be a little complicated because the starting sections, like, it's harder to tell like where you're starting with the same color stripe, but I think that the yarn is so pretty that there's a lot of possibilities. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. And oh, subscribe, like, turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video. As I said, I publish at least twice a week and you don't want to miss a thing. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Bye.